back to Thanks I'll Take It From Here, the podcast where we talk about the stories that stay with you long after you turn the last page. I'm Cami, co-host of this series and founder of Take It From Here Studios.
And I'm Victoria, co-host of Thanks I'll Read It From Here. Today we're joined by author Heather Colley to discuss her debut novel, The Gilded Butterfly Effect.
This book alternates between Stella, a sorority girl trying to hold it all together, and Penny, a loner who gets pulled into Stella's world. Together, their story explores the highs and lows of drug abuse in a college setting. It's dark, sharp, and at times surprisingly funny. Heather, welcome to the show. We're so glad to have you here. So before we dive into the book, let's start with something fun and a little personal. So the Gilded Butterfly Effect really made me think about my own college days and reflecting on that time of my life now as someone who's 30 is kind of, crazy to say I'm 30 out loud, but reflecting on that time, it really made me think about, just things that I would do differently. One of the biggest things is I would tell myself to not use black eyeliner to draw my eyebrows because I always look surprised in every setting. In all seriousness, I would probably also give myself some slack and I would also stand up for myself more. So I'm curious, what is a piece of advice that you would give to your college self? And we could start with you, Heather, and then go to Victoria.
I think we were both in college around the same time, like 2013 to 16. I would also tell myself lighter on the makeup and the black chokers, maybe leave those behind. Well, I think like a lot of the characters in the book, I sometimes felt lonely in college, so I think I would just hope it does get better, and it's not all about college. Your social world doesn't begin and end in college. It gets better from there.
I think for me, was in college around the same time as the two of you. And so I think back then it was hard to really stand up for myself. And I found myself similar to the characters in the book in a lot of toxic friendships that I could have easily found my way out of, but didn't necessarily know how to have those conversations or stand up for myself. So I think I would say, hey, it's okay to leave something if it's not for you anymore.
That part. I could use that advice now as a full-blown 30-year-old adult.
I think we all can a little bit. Okay, so now let's talk about the book. So, can you tell us a little bit about what went into selecting the title?
The title comes from actually Shakespeare's King Lear. I think the full line is something like, "We will all laugh at gilded butterflies." I have just always loved that image in general, and I think you could interpret it in a number of ways, but to me, it kind of means you have a butterfly, this beautiful, free flying thing that is gilded in a sort of thin veneer of gold, which makes it sort of object for display or manipulation. And I think that that is really applicable to what happens to the girls in the book.
I love that, and I can absolutely see that for sure.
So this story really dives deep into mental health and drug use and Greek life, which are, very heavy topics and very real topics. What made you want to explore that all together in one story?
It's a very heavy book. It deals with a lot of heavy topics that I think a lot of readers will find dark, perhaps even difficult to read. But I think for those reasons, it's important to write about them. I think naturally we tend to avoid thinking, reading, even talking about some of the hardest, darkest parts of being young. And that leads to people feeling isolated. So I think in a lot of ways, speaking about them candidly and earnestly and directly is actually really important just to getting the stories out there to begin with.
So, the book focuses on a very specific side of campus life, specifically Greek life, and then all the chaos that surrounds it. So, I'm curious what inspired that portrayal. Did it come from research or interviews, or was it more from personal experience and observations that you might have had in college?
I went to the University of Michigan where the book is set. So I got the setting very much from my observations as an undergrad. I found the whole Greek life system and the whole sorority house thing really intriguing. Like I'm so sure a lot of people do. And I immediately thought it could be a really interesting avenue for fiction because it's sort of claustrophobic, it's hyper intense, a bit cultish in a lot of ways. And then Greek life is in the news a lot. And I think you hear about it through a lot of pessimistic news stories. And so I read up about it, about their history and their tactics and just the general environment that are created in these fraternity and sorority houses. And I incorporated a lot of that reading.
I do think Greek life is such a interesting avenue to explore fiction, like you said. And I think just the college setting in general. And I really want to talk about this one scene that really made me LOL. And it's that opening with Penny when she decides to leave everything behind and she gets on a bus with no plan, no charger, and calls her friend who has no idea she's coming to ask for a ride. And then before she even gets confirmation that her friend is even going to pick her up, her phone dies. I would have completely panicked. I think most people would have panicked in that environment, but not Penny. She just walks into a public restroom, throws her phone in a trash bin full of tampons, and gets back on the bus like everything is completely fine. It's so unhinged and so funny in a calm, kind of unbothered way. And it actually reminded me of that Gossip Girl moment when Serena throws her phone in the trash after fighting with her best friend. Was that kind of impulsive, chaotic energy something you wanted readers to laugh at? Or were you using it to show how detached Penny was and had become at that point in the story?
It's a bit of both. I want a lot of these scenes, if you see humor in them, for them to be funny. But at the same time, I know that the behavior, as you said, is very chaotic, and a lot of people would find that alarming. And the girls are unhinged, and I established that very early on. But it's also meant to establish just how detached, how emotionally volatile she is, the impulsive decisions that she makes, which will all affect her when she gets to the university.
Can you tell us about one of your favorite humorous or just unhinged, absurd scenes that you think really captures the overall spirit of the book?
So one of the scenes that I wrote to be intentionally funny were the psychiatrist scenes. Stella has quite an incompetent psychiatrist who's called Julie, and Stella is kind of a master manipulator as well. So this is a perfect storm. And I think I tried to give that a level of humor, a level of absurdity that I think there often is within mental health care. So those scenes in particular, I tried to give a bit of a gloss of humor.
Can we talk about just like Penny and Leah's friendship dynamic for a second? I think one thing your book does really well is showing how toxic friendships can be subtle. Watching Leah go from dropping everything to pick Penny up, then completely abandoning her in her sorority house was so unhinged and so funny. It's interesting kind of watching their dynamic throughout the book. And I wanted to know, were you hoping to explore toxic friendships with their relationship and also what loyalty and neglect can look like in friendships?
There's the relationship between Penny and Leah, her old friend from high school, who's kind of the link between Penny and the rest of these girls, and of course, Penny and Stella. And I think the relationships are very different, but it starts off with Leah essentially abandoning Penny. And I imagined Penny like in the corner of the sorority house living room, like surrounded by blankets and like bits of paper. That was my vision for her. It's kind of bleak, but I think that it's like very real that people get caught up in college life, and I don't think it's too far from reality that friends abandon one another in these sorts of situations, especially when you're that age. Especially in a system like this, you're involved in a highly immersive system that expects a lot of you, and your friend shows up and she just doesn't belong, and that's very obvious. And I think Leah abandoning her is kind of very true to what people might do in that instance, because Leah's life is with the sorority now, not with her old friend from high school.
So we're going to pivot to something a little fun. So music was such a big part of my college experience, whether I was getting ready for a party or cramming for an exam. I always kind of had a playlist ready for any like situation that I needed. And I'm curious, what kind of music do you think Penny and Stella would listen to? If you can't think of a specific artist, maybe just describe just the kind of vibe or energy their playlist would have.
I'm sure you remember like the Chainsmokers Closer. That's sort of the vibe that I imagine for them. Probably because you attach a lot of yourselves to your narrators, your fiction characters. But I think it's a great song still. But I see them listening to that and all of those big songs that were frat anthems that you can sing along to. That I see that as being kind of the soundtrack of their lives.
That's so funny. Yeah. I think when I was in college, Fetty Wap had just come out and that was like such a big deal. But something I really love doing on this podcast is just exploring characters beyond the page. So I really appreciate you sharing what their playlist would sound like.
So, thinking ahead a little bit to the end of the book, what do you hope readers take away once they finish that last page, especially those who might see themselves in either Stella or Penny's characters?
The ending, it doesn't really offer much hope to the characters in a lot of ways. And I think some people have a taste for that in their fiction and some people don't. And I often go back and forth about which sort of level of bleakness I prefer. But I think just because it has a bleak ending doesn't mean that the characters sort of end. I think a lot of what I wanted to do with the story was show that much of it is based on choice and small decisions that these characters make. And I think especially for Stella, I think that there's I think that there's a future for her. I wanted to show her as a sort of dynamic character that has her wits about her. She's intelligent, she's clever. She just has made choices which have resulted in things like traumas and all these things that she carries with her, largely because of the sorority house and the fraternity house. But I want readers to think if they relate to these characters that there's a future in a lot of ways for these characters too, and that this is still just a moment in their lives. And that's sort of why I wanted to leave the ending ambiguous as well, so people can sort of fill in what they might see.
I love that though, because it's the notion of you're not a bad person, you just had bad experiences. And I think that's such a strong message to be able to leave, especially with such a impressionable age of people and young adults.
So, this is your debut novel, and I'm sure there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that went into making it and getting to this point in your career. How does it feel to finally have your book out in the world?
It feels great to have it out in the world. My aunties have read it and they're like texting me like, "Are you okay? Like, is this based on reality?" So I had to be like, "No, no, it's a work of fiction, you know." My mom, "It's a work of fiction." I've had some messages, especially on Instagram, from people who were early readers and who said that they really saw themselves in one or both of the main characters. And I think that's the best reaction. That's the best message that you can get as an author, that your characters have in some way connected with a reader. And that's just been the most amazing thing. That's all you can hope for, really.
So I am also an author, but I'm self-published. I haven't gone through the full publishing journey yet. So I'm curious, what has been the most surprising or rewarding part of the publishing journey for you?
It takes a long time to get a book published. Self-publishing or traditional publishing, it's a process. And in that process, you are so in it. You're so in the editing and the cover and the marketing before it comes out. I think you forget that people will read your book. I don't know if that happened to you when your book came out, but especially when you see like in a review yourself referenced in third person, Colley's prose. You're like, oh my God, right, of course, because I wrote that book. And I found that to be really shocking in a lot of ways, because all you're thinking about, you forget about the book, you forget about the fact that you wrote the book, and all you think about is everything that has to do with packaging the book. So remembering that people are consuming it as well has been really interesting over the past few days. And it's been great also just knowing that it's reaching people.
I understand completely. The first like aha moment for me was the first time someone asked me to sign it and I was like, "Wait, oh, right, I'm the author. I forgot. Completely forgot."
So funny. I think you both can kind of answer this question, but what's one piece of advice you would give to someone who's just starting this journey?
Well, I would say I wrote this book probably 7 or 8 years ago now. And so, just as hard as it is, just try to have patience. And that's so hypocritical because I have no patience and many times wanted to give up. But if you can just really try to like keep at it and just keep working at it and know in your heart that it will come in some way, it will happen if you believe in your story and you find the other people that believe. But just try to have patience, which is truly the most annoying advice. I'm so sorry because I had that advice and found it so annoying.
Yeah, and I think don't give up, which is also pretty much the same thing that you said, Heather. Like, that's the worst advice you can give someone. But truly, like, I had this idea 10 years ago and I started writing it and I was like, why am I doing this? This is so dumb and so stupid and no one's ever going to want to read this. Well, flash forward, I was like, I'm 30 now and I've never done what I wanted to do, which was write a full length novel. And now that I have pushed forward, I have a published novella, I'm querying my first novel. I have like 3 others that are partway through. And has it been this huge successful journey? No, but I have something that I can look back on and be like, I did the thing. And all it took was me not actually letting myself give up. So I think keep pushing on, put it down on paper. Even if it's awful, that's your first draft. You have so many opportunities to continue to keep working through it and making it what you want it to be, but you have to just keep trying.
Yeah, I really appreciate you both kind of giving that advice because I know this process is extremely difficult and there are great days, there are bad days, and I hope people who listen to this can say, "You know what? Let me not give up. Let me go back, give my headphones some tea and start typing again." So I really appreciate you both sharing that. But before we wrap up, I want to do a quick little activity. So this is something I'm going to be doing with all of my author featurettes. So we're going to end the episode with a little segment inspired by my flagship show, Thinks I'll Take It From Here. The idea behind it is that every great story leaves you wondering what happens next. And I love giving authors a chance to imagine how their worlds can continue beyond that final page. So since we're in this era of sequels and prequels and spin-offs and reboots and all of these things, if you ever had the opportunity to expand upon the Gilded Butterfly Effect, what direction would you take? Would you want to go backwards and give us more of Penny's backstory? Or would you be interested in kind of a time jump after the dramatic events of the ending? No spoilers. Or do you prefer to leave it as this kind of ambiguous, open-ended story that keeps readers guessing?
Stella, she's one of the main characters in the book, and I really loved writing her. I think that there's a lot that could be done with her in her future, and I'd love for her to grow a bit. I would love for readers to know that you can grow after these sorts of events. I'd love for her to experience her 20s and the trials and tribulations like that as well. But I really enjoy occupying her voice, and I think she's funny. And I would like to see what sort of kind of chaos she gets into in the future. I've written a few short stories where she is the narrator again, and it's a bit of a future time jump.
I'm also going to answer this question, even though I didn't write the book, but I was really interested in Penny as a character. I want to see more unhinged Penny moments because I know they're extremely relatable. So that's definitely what I would love to see expanded in this universe that you've created. Victoria, did you have anything you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, so I would want to know more about Leah's story because I feel like she was such an underdeveloped character because there was so much chaos happening that you didn't have time to focus on her as well. But I would love to know, like, why did her and Penny drift apart so much? Like, what was the real story there? Because clearly she still loved her enough to go take care of her and bring her in, but then she just threw her in a pile in the middle of the living room and was like, good luck, until it became convenient for her. So I would have loved to hear, like what was going through her head, how she handles Penny's, ultimate, ending in that book and all of the chaos that came with that. And really just knowing, like, what is she now doing to prioritize herself and making sure that she doesn't end up in that situation again.
Thank you so much for joining us today. This has really been such an insightful conversation. It's also been a lot of fun, and I really appreciate hearing more about your process and perspective behind the Gilded Butterfly Effect. Can you tell listeners where they can follow you on social media?
Instagram is Heather Colley Author, and TikTok, which is a little different, is PhD with Paige, Paige. And then my website, everything's there, heathercolleyauthor.com.
I also just wanted to quickly add, it is almost Weird Girl winter, and if you need some great inspiration for what books to read for that vibe, definitely follow Heather. She has great recommendations, but The Gilded Butterfly is available now, and you can check the show notes to get your copy today. You'll also find the links to Heather's socials there. If you enjoyed today's episode, please follow the podcast, share it with a friend who loves messy, sometimes chaotic, but always meaningful stories. This has been another episode of Thinks I'll Read It From Here. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.